Hello everyone, Keir Smith here, back with another video, and for today's video we're going to be looking at a landmark album and the importance of it. This is Radiohead's fourth album, released on the 2nd of October in the year 2000, Kid A. Following up the band's previous album and what is, in my opinion, one of the top 20 greatest albums of all time in OK Computer was never going to be easy. It was loved by fans and lauded by most every critic. And the making of Kid A was a long and difficult process, and the album eventually arrived nearly 3.5 years after the release of OK Computer, and this was back in the day when bands were usually good for putting an album out every 2 years or so on average. So it took a long time, but riding high on the success of OK Computer, its singles and the tour, the band were under no real pressure from the record company to produce new material, so they took their time. The band held sessions in Paris in January 1999, but lead singer Tom York had been suffering from a case of writer's block and had nothing prepared. And there were differing ideas about what musical direction the band should take next. Fed up of the prog rock analogies that had been levelled at the band, guitarist Ed O'Brien thought the band should make an album of snappy, 3-minute, polished guitar tunes, void of any sound effects or studio trickery. But Tom York saw things another way. He'd been listening to and enjoying warp artists like Altekra and Aphex Twin, and he said there was no chance of the album sounding like that. I'd completely had it with melody. I just wanted rhythm. All melodies to me were pure embarrassment. It quickly became apparent that one thing was certain. Kid A was going to be a completely different album. There was going to be a different approach to both the writing and recording, and with different instrumentation. The band then moved into a studio in Copenhagen in March 1999 and held some sessions there, but even then, Tom York still didn't have any songs ready. He'd come in with merely an interesting sound or a drum sequence, but no real songs. And Tom York said it was about generating bits of work that may be incomplete and may not be going anywhere, and by the time you finish it, it may be unrecognisable, but it may be far better than what you started with. It quickly became clear that Kid A was going to be an album about ideas. It was going to be cutting and pasting things and piecing them together and seeing what worked. And it would have no doubt been a daunting prospect for the band. After all, Radiohead were effectively guitar, bass and drums. So the band members had to get their heads around the fact that they might not be playing on some tracks. There might not be any drums on one track. There might not be any guitars on one track. And guitarist Ed O'Brien said, what we've done is split the band and reform it with the same 5 members. In September of 1999, the band eventually moved into their own studio, and with co-producer Nigel Godrich, they finally started to make inroads into what would eventually become Kid A. He had the idea to split the band into 2 groups. One group would be in the programming room and the other in the studio. One group would make a basic sequence, a loop or an interesting noise, and hand it over to the other group to expand on. And so the band carried on like this and experimented further and persevered until they found something of interest. And as you can probably imagine, some awful sounds and noises were made and were left on the cutting room floor. But from that, things started to materialise. The band had all but turned away from traditional instrumentation and let influences like electronica, krautrock and jazz fusion come in. All the way through the recording process, there was nothing certain about Kid A. There was certainly nothing to say that this was going to be another groundbreaking album like OK Computer. And in the lead up to the release of Kid A, oddly, there was no promotion, no singles, no music videos. The band didn't do any interviews. But the album finally arrived on the 2nd of October, the year 2000, Kid A, and I was really excited about this release. I was a huge Radiohead fan at this point. I played Pablo Honey, The Bends and OK Computer especially many, many times. I couldn't wait for Kid A to come out. So I'll take you through the album now, track by track. There's 10 tracks on Kid A, so we'll go through each one and I'll tell you what I think of them. So the first track on Kid A is Everything in Its Right Place, and this really sets the tone for the album. I remember getting home with the album, first day of its release, running upstairs, putting it on the CD player and thinking, well, yeah, I wasn't expecting that. I thought, this is a bit weird, but strangely, it didn't take me long to love this song, led by that keyboard melody. It's a gorgeous piece of post-rock electronica. Tom York's manipulated vocals throw up these odd phrases like, yesterday I woke up sucking a lemon, and his vocals are all chopped up and some used as backing vocals, to good effect I might add. I remember thinking that it was a little bit disturbing and yet quite calming at the same time, and as I say, it didn't take me long to really enjoy this track. And I remember getting to the end of the album and thinking, that first track, that was the best track, and it might still be my favourite song on the album. Maybe. The title track is next, and I remember thinking at the time, this is bloody strange too, but again, it didn't take me long to like it. It's a lovely ambient piece of music, and then York's awkward and undecipherable vocals come in, but I like them too. The choppy drums are superbly placed, and that bass line is a cool groove. And that rising synth part at the end that comes up and with what sounds like some strange animal noises, that's a really beautiful thing. But admittedly, utterly strange, but I really love this track. The national anthem is next, and this swamp rock song is heavy with its prominent fuzz bass and big drums, and it sounds like a more familiar Radiohead sound, but then it morphs into this jazz inflected freak out, a cacophony of sound with saxophones and trombones blaring. Again, this is a bit disturbing, and if I'm honest, it probably goes on a little bit too long, but still a fascinating listen. But after all that noise, the perfectly sequenced How to Disappear Completely comes next, and first off, I love that title. And this song is calm and tranquil and floats along with York's far away but downtrodden vocal, coupled with a gentle acoustic guitar. And it has some lyrics that you can get into before York detaches himself by singing, I'm not here, this isn't happening. It's a song that takes you on a real journey. It has a beautiful and ethereal feel to it before guitarist Johnny Greenwood's stunning orchestral arrangement takes the song even higher. It really takes your breath away, and the song comes to a cathartic and euphoric climax. It's an amazing song. And after the beauty of that, again, I really like the sequencing of this next track, which is an instrumental called Tree Fingers. And this is a moody, gloomy, but in a good way, piece of ambient music taken from a sample of Ed O'Brien's guitar, and it was edited down from around about 10 minutes. But it's a piece of music I really enjoy, and coming after those first 4 songs where there's lots of different sounds and ideas and information, this acts as a lovely interlude. Optimistic is next, and this is a great track. Love at first listen, and the guitars come out again as Radiohead play live in the studio together, and it features some excellent choppy drums from Phil Selway, who also really attacks the drums in the latter part of the song. Tom York's falsetto is really good here, and it even features a rather optimistic lyric as York sings, you can try the best you can. The best you can is good enough. How about that? And elsewhere, York rages about fishes, dinosaurs and Animal Farm. But it's a great performance by the band and, as I say, a great song. In Limbo is next, which was actually the first song to be recorded for the album under the working title Lost at Sea. And the backing track, which is played in a different key, is a lovely contrast to Johnny Greenwood's beautiful arpeggiated guitar pattern. And I love the way that York mumbles his way through what I guess is the first verse before you get the more decipherable lyrics later on with I'm lost at sea, don't bother me, I've lost my way. And this is another strange and brooding track, but a really interesting one. And listening back to the album in preparation for this video, this song really stood out to me. Idiotech is next, and what a track this is. When I first heard this, it really blew my mind. Apparently Tom York cut up sections of a 20-minute synthesizer sample that was made by Johnny Greenwood, but no doubt what came out of that is something quite brilliant. This song just pounds all the way through. It's relentless. I love Tom York singing here and the abstract lyrics especially. Who's in the bunker? Women and children first. I have seen too much. You haven't seen enough. It's like Radiohead are making their very own brand of disco music and it's brilliant. Morning Bell is next, and if there was one weak spot on Kid A, I'd probably say that this was it. It's not a bad song, it's a little bit loose, it's kind of sparse but frantic and has York pleading, release me, and asking, where do you park the car? Again, it's a little bit odd, but I must say again, I really like Phil Selway's drumming on this track. He shuffles around, imaginatively so, keeping it interesting. And that brings us to the final track on the album, Motion Picture Soundtrack. And this was a very old song that was from the early 90s, I think. This odd sounding, mournful pump organ is coupled with York's equally mournful vocal, which is then joined by a choir. And you hear this beautiful sampled harp, which swells and brings the song to quite a dramatic and beautiful finale as York bids us farewell by singing, I will see you in the next life. It's wonderfully lush and a bit Disney-like, dare I say it. Well, I think it's beautiful and a really sweet ending to this truly odd album. But we're not quite finished there. We then get this 50-second untitled instrumental piece, which isn't much of anything really, and that closes Kid A. So that was Kid A, and I can still remember listening to it for the first time and getting to the end of the album and being really excited by it. I thought, this is great. I didn't love all of it, but I liked most of it a lot. I just remember thinking how brave and ambitious it was and how daring the music was. I mean, it really was unlike anything I'd heard before. And I remember passing it on to my brother Craig and my friend Daniel and saying, you've got to hear this. It's nothing like you'd expect from Radiohead. And for me, on that first listen, the standout tracks were definitely Everything in Its Right Place, Optimistic and Idiotech. And I didn't really think too much about songs like Tree Fingers and In Limbo, which I absolutely love now. And Radiohead took a big risk in making this album, and not only was it a really important album for them, it was a really important album for the world of music. I thought it was a giant leap forward, and it towered above anything that any other band was doing artistically and musically at that time. And naturally, it baffled some listeners and critics who obviously took their chance to say, what have they done? What is this music? But thankfully, it didn't take them too long to get on board with it. And another thing that was interesting about the release of Kid A is it was one of the earliest albums to be experienced online. Over 18 websites posted the album, and it was streamed some 400,000 times weeks before it was released. And it captured a strange period at the turn of the century when people started to transfer their lives to an online world. I always think that there's a looming danger hanging over Kid A, a sense of impending doom, but for me, dangerous is exciting. I'd say the album is self-indulgent. I'd say it was unhinged. I'd say it was enigmatic and hard to understand, but it works and hangs together really well as an album. So I'm a huge fan. I thought it was great then. I still think it's great now, but I'd like to leave you with a quote that I read, which I thought was very fitting. A classic album like Kid A can connect us with the past, present and future simultaneously, making them feel like one and the same. A multi-dimensional form of historical and personal narrative. So, over to you. That was Radiohead's Kid A, but what do you think of the album? Please leave any thoughts or comments you may have down below. And as always, thank you so much for stopping by and watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.